Grow by Jacqueline Krish. There once was a flower, a pretty little flower, who would lift up her smooth petaled head. She was bright, she was cheery, and her petals were the right color red. She was the pick of the litter, the cutest of the bunch. The sun shone her extra rays, and the bees swarmed her for lunch. But as she grew taller, other plants encroached towards her. Those invaders were an altogether motley crew. Her once peaceful garden grew crowded and scraggly as she struggled to keep up her fair-weathered view. She seemed oddly out of place now as the multitude loomed. Each day she would strain a little harder and preen to catch the eye of someone who'd walk by. She wished and prayed only to be seen. She so desperately wanted to be chosen for her wares, for just one to look at her and say, "Oh yes, this one's perfect. She'll just make so-and-so's day." But the days came, and she continued to strain until her perfect petal started to slump. A something colored over her. It was cold and hard, and it went deep, all the way down to her stump. As the winds picked up and the breeze started to howl, she needn't strain anymore. She simply let go and decided it was enough. Now it was time to travel. What she left behind she may never know, but she took what was hers and she left. She lifted up off and trained straight ahead and never truly looked back or wept. The air was magnificent, surprising, and sweet. She breathed for the first time in years. "Ah," she said, "what a life I could live. No holdbacks, insecurities, or fears." Now she was the seer, the one who assessed, and what a good lot she did see. And as the wind kept her swirling and twirling through space, she was intoxicated with the feeling of being free. She journeyed along, being warmed by the sun, a safe and ever-treasured friend, the only one from her past who remembered how her petals used to curl in at the end. She and the sun and the wind ventured on, passing through this and that place, until she passed by a strong, mighty oak and felt a pang in the oddest of ways. Roots, she seemed to recall from some place deep down inside. Roots, she sighed deeply as the wind brought her down, as she reluctantly swallowed her pride. The ground was much harder and warmer than she recalled, from that time which seemed so long ago. "I could live here and I could love here," she settled in saying, and looking up said, "I just need to grow." And that she did through all the aches and pains of being in the throes, until finally came new offshoots sprouting from her toes. As she changed and adapted, she would still listen out for the wind, a lifeline to the world and the air that she couldn't and wouldn't rescind. When it picked up, she'd lean and allow it to brush her cheek, and she would glean all the wisdom it had to speak. She'd learn new interesting tales of the world, losing herself to its beat. But then it would die down, and she was left only with the sound of the pitter-patter of insect feet. She would sink in her soil and keep at her usual toil, living off the buzz of those words, her link to that her before she had to grow. But then the days grew hot, and her old friend started blazing, with no trace of her favorite breeze. She couldn't understand why she was wilting and why her sunny friend was giving her the squeeze. With a hot, sweaty mouth, she railed at her friend, "Why are you making me this way? Why grow me and throw me? Why make me then bake me? Why did you take my flight away?" Her son gave her no answers, but blazed in disregard as her accusations settled at her feet. She looked at them solemnly, seeing their frailty, and understood that it was she that was weak. She gave in and shrugged her limping leaves and accepted that they were not wings. Just then a tear rolled down, but then so did many other wet things. They fell and they fell as the puddle grew deeper, and all of a sudden she needed to learn how to swim. But how does a flyer and grower begin to learn such a thing? Just then she saw her leaves floating up, graceful, buoyant, and balanced. Peacefully they swayed in the rising water. With each drop they seemed to dance. "Oh," she thought magically, "it seems that I know how. It sprouted up just from within. My beautiful body seems just on its own to know just how to swim." She relished her new knowledge all through the storm and didn't seem to notice the roar. There was information inside of her. She couldn't wait to see what was in store. Then the sun came out and the water receded, leaving the flower quite restored. "Sun," said the flower, "I'm sorry for what I said. You know, before. The sun shone her warmly, and she stretched her petals to soak up every last ray. And a voice inside of her spoke up and said, "I think we're here to stay." "But what of the world?" she fretted and said. "How will I know how to be?" "You will be what you will be," said the tree. "You will see." And it dropped an acorn from its branch. "This will be a tree, and it came from me, but its sustenance comes from below." The flower looked at her soil, once unnoticed and dull. Could this possibly be feeding my soul? Could my leaves and the bees and the shade from the trees possibly help me grow? Could it be that the sun that has always been at my side could be harsh only to break me down, so that the cold stinging water that beats me and treats me like fodder could lift me up and give me a crown? But what of that crown? What if no one sees my most beautiful, majestic mane? And of what use is a crown when it's in the ground, and there it must remain? Then the breeze pushed right by her, and she noticed it then. Something light and feathery went into flight. It was new, but familiar, small and impossibly light. The seed, as impossible as it seemed to be, came from her, and off into the air it was sent. It was her, and yet there she stayed, whole and yet slightly spent. Astounded she stood in her soil, with her roots, with her slightly askewed leaves and curling petals, looking skyward as her potential sought out its own travels. Then an ant crawled on up, tickling her stalk, and she looked down and started to pray. "May I live and grow in my soil, fertilized by those I love in their toil. May I swim from within, use my leaves to shelter the bees, and thank you, trusty sun, who always finds me and grows me into what I will be."